As you have already seen, the topic of our session this morning is caring for the most vulnerable unborn babies and their mothers. I've been involved in this type of work for a good number of years, but still, even after so many years, I'm still very nervous when I speak about this topic because it's such a sensitive one. But I think that as Christians, we can, it's not just that we can have, but we must have a compassionate approach. And an approach that is filled with grace and understanding. So that's the angle that we are going to use when we speak about this topic this morning. So we are going to look at this topic from the main angle was the compassionate one, but then we are also going to explore the biblical perspective. We're going to look at what science, law, and culture have to say, and then we will also look at what is our responsibility as Christians and what is God calling us to do. So the Bible tells us that children are to be cherished because they are very precious, but we live in a culture, in a society where they are actually often seen as a problem to be avoided. And there are a few words that are often connected with the status of an unborn baby. Words such as unwanted, clump of cells, fetus, and a few others. And actually, I think that unborn babies are often mistreated and devalued in today's society. And abortion is actually often seen as a quick fix for the problems that they supposedly create. So there are 43 million abortions taking place every year around the world. That means that there are 125,000 abortions per day. That is 125,000 abortions today worldwide. I think these statistics are absolutely heartbreaking. And every year, abortion ends 1/5 of the pregnancies worldwide and 1/3 of pregnancies in Europe. Heartbreaking figures, but this is not just about statistics, because behind each number, there are families who are struggling, there are men and women who are very deeply affected emotionally and physically. There is a silent grief that they are carrying. And yet, abortion is often called a basic healthcare need, which is a paradox. And the question is, why do these numbers speak to us? Why do the numbers on the screen speak to us? Well, I think that's because each individual life speaks about God's love and plan for humanity. And also, each individual life speaks about the potential and possibility that comes with that. And that's because babies matter, because mothers matter, and fathers matter. And there is only one Christian worldview that has the intellectual resources to protect unborn babies and mothers. Well, who can guess what's that worldview, right? The Christian worldview. And as Daniel Darling says, that's a very good quote, actually. There is no basis for human dignity without a connection to God. The Bible's robust view of humanity is one of the best gifts Christianity gives to the world. I think that's very special because humans are made in the image of God. They are made for His glory. And we stand out from the rest of creation. And the first introduction that we have on this comes very early on in the Bible. In Genesis 1, we read, "Then God said, let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness." So God created humankind in His image, in the image of God, He created them. And then Psalm 139 speaks very clearly about God's love for all humans. And we read, "For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret." Then further on, Jeremiah says that God called him to be a prophet even before birth. "The word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Something that is quite special, I think, is that one of the New Testament writers, Dr. Luke, records Mary's and Elizabeth's pregnancy story. And he records the life in the womb of Jesus and of John the Baptist. And he tells us that John the Baptist, in the womb of his mother, gave a perfectly human response to the news of the conception of Christ, and that he was filled with the Holy Spirit before birth. He leaped inside the womb. And Jesus' life in the womb has a huge significance. And I think God is making a very clear statement about the value of the unborn child through that. And journalist Matt Walsh writes that Jesus was himself at one point an unborn child. If there were any questions before his arrival about the sanctity of human life, those questions were answered 2,000 years ago. So, what does science say about all of this? We won't go into all the details, but we know that science actually confirms what the Bible tells us, that human life begins at conception, and technological advances such as the ultrasound scanning and research on fetal development prove that. And actually, this is a reality that is recognized even by the promoters of abortion. That is the reason why our arguments against abortion are both logical and moral. There is quite a good number of people who promote abortion who recognize that and state that very clearly. And if you are interested in resources, I'm happy to share those. And something that is quite ironical is that surgeons are increasingly performing surgery on unborn children, and sometimes they apply anesthesia in order to numb their pain, while in the same medical facility, doctors are ending lives through abortions of babies at similar stages of development. There is a huge irony in that, I believe. So one might ask, if science is so clear about the beginning of life, then why is the culture of abortion prevailing? At the heart of this is the personhood theory. Whether a baby in the womb deserves the right to life, as all people do, whether his or her life is worthy of protection. And Nancy Pearcey explains that abortion rests on personhood theory. For today's culture, being human is not enough to qualify for personhood. The unborn baby has to earn the status of personhood by achieving and exercising the capacity for consciousness, self-awareness, and autonomy. The unborn baby is defined by what he or she values. This theory sees no value in the living human body and creates a new category of individual, the human non-person. I think that this theory drastically dehumanizes all of us, actually. It doesn't only dehumanize the unborn baby, because a key part of our identity is lost if our bodies do not have any inherent value. And the Bible obviously clearly contradicts the personhood theory and emphasizes that no human being needs to earn the right to be treated with respect and dignity, because our dignity is intrinsic. And Francis Schaeffer very helpfully emphasized that if man is not made in the image of God, nothing stands in the way of inhumanity. If membership in the human species does not mean that someone is a person, then it falls to whoever has the power to decide the criteria for who is a person and who is not a person. And those who promote abortion do not want for the baby to be a person. A well-known abortionist actually said that not everyone is meant to be born. I believe that, he said, for a baby, life begins when his mother wants him. And this is not new. We have seen this in history before, and Randy Alcorn explains that whites once decided that blacks were less human, men decided that women had fewer rights, Nazis decided that Jews were not meaningful, and now big people decide that little people are not meaningful enough to have rights. Let's see what the law says about all of this. Well, historically, the life of unborn babies have been protected by law as a result of Judeo-Christian principles. But in the last 60 years, as we know, in much of the West, well, it's not just the Western world, it's other areas of the world as well, have moved away from these principles, and unborn babies do not have the protection that they once used to have. And abortion has become legal in many countries, and it is promoted in the name of equality and freedom. And for instance, it's interesting to know that Malta is the only country at the EU level who doesn't allow abortion under any circumstances. And Poland's law, actually, shows a high level of protection for unborn babies and their mothers, and only allows abortion under very narrow circumstances. And those who promote abortion often refer to human rights when they do so. But actually, there is no right to abortion enshrined in any international treaty. On the contrary, Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that everyone has the right to life. And then the Convention of the Rights of the Child states that every child has the inherent right to life, and that the child, by reason of his physical and mental immaturity, needs special safeguards and care, including appropriate legal protection before as well as after birth. So sadly, the huge push for abortion in today's culture contradicts the principle enshrined in international treaties. Abortion and feminism. Well, as we know, abortion is a very complex issue that is often associated with feminism. But unlike many 21st century feminists, early feminists were strongly opposed to abortion, and actually they actively campaigned against it. So Alice Paul, a famous feminist of the early 1900s, called abortion the ultimate exploitation of women. Then Susan Anthony, another very famous feminist, said that when a woman destroys the life of her unborn child, it is a sign that by education or circumstances, she has been greatly wronged. Well, however, as we know, things have changed, and second wave feminism took turn in the 1960s, and it aggressively campaigned for reproductive freedom, which includes abortion. And former abortionist Dr. Bernard Nathanson stated that in the 1960s, he and his fellow abortion rights strategists deliberately linked abortion to the women's issue, so it could be furthered not on its own merits, but on the merits of women's rights. So there is a huge, as we know, a very strong link between abortion and women's rights. A huge analysis of worldwide population data from 1970 to 2017 suggests that sex-selective abortion has led to at least 23 million fewer girls being born. Many societies value sons over daughters, as we know, and while the majority of these missing girls are in China and in India, actually this sex-selective abortion is also performed in the Western society. So abortion has become a means of eliminating unwanted females across the globe, and that is a tragedy. Abortion has completely failed as a social policy designed to aid women, writes Sherin Foster, president of Feminists for Life. It is a reflection that we have failed women. So abortion doesn't create a society where women can flourish, and abortion is actually against women, as a lot of studies and data show. And it's interesting to see that the current feminist narrative says that abortion liberates women from patriarchy, from being controlled by men. But that narrative is flawed, and we will see why. So pro-abortion feminists say that women have total autonomous control over their pregnant bodies. But that argument actually encourages male disengagement and irresponsibility, because it allows men to take sexual favors without any responsibilities for the consequences, since the woman is the one who has to take that responsibility. So actually, a liberal abortion policy encourages male patriarchy. Then the pro-abortion feminist narrative suggests that there is a battle between the interest of the mother and the interest of the unborn baby. But it is bizarre to think about pregnancy as a battle between the unborn baby and the mother, because the interests of the mother and of the baby are in the same direction. They are not opposed. What is good for the mother is good for the baby as well, and vice versa. And abortion enforces the false narrative that a woman has to choose between being a mother and pursuing her dreams. And something that is often overlooked by feminists is the fact that males frequently coerce women to have abortions. There is a lot of data showing that, but this is concealed by women out of fear and shame. And a liberal abortion policy actually facilitates coercive control of men over women and does not facilitate women to make decisions. There is a silent grief that is carried by so many in our society, and there are numerous negative physical, psychological, and emotional consequences of abortion that can affect women for a lifetime. Yet, most women are not informed of these serious consequences, and studies show that 81% of women who had an abortion were found to be at an increased risk for mental health problems, including depression, alcohol, drug abuse, post-traumatic syndrome, and other issues. And then many doctors actually agree that abortion increases the rates of breast cancer, preterm births, infections, and many other physical complications. So surveys of women who have experienced post-abortion complications show that more than 90% of women were not given enough information. Then more than 80% say that it is very likely that they wouldn't have aborted if they had not been so strongly encouraged to abort by others. Then 83% of those women say that they would have carried to term if they had received support from their family, from their partners, and from society. And 70% of women who have aborted claim they were driven by either social or economic constraints. So I think the reality is that women in our society are exploited through abortion. Another point that I wanted to make is that abortion discriminates against unborn babies with disabilities, and actually it tells people with disabilities that they are not wanted. Abortion rates for prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome are extremely high. As you can see on the screen, nearly 100% in Iceland, 98% in Denmark, 80 to 90% in Norway, and 90% in the UK. None of the European institutions condemn the discrimination of disabled people through abortion policies and legislation in Europe and beyond. And this, again, creates a culture that tells disabled people that they are not welcomed, that they are not wanted because they do not measure, they do not meet the standards. It also creates a culture that tells parents that they have the right to choose only the most desirable children. But the question is, who decides whether someone is desirable or wanted or unwanted? Wanting is simply someone's subjective feeling toward another, and the value of a human being does not depend on whether they are wanted or not. We know that millions of people, billions of women and men, both in society and in churches, are suffering under the shame and the guilt of abortion. So what can we do as Christians? I think that the solution begins with me, begins with you, and with all of us as a community, as a group. And I think that the first thing we can do is to pray. Because abortion is much more than a legal and a political battle, and the Bible speaks very clearly about that. Paul describes what we are dealing with as powers and principalities. So we need to ask for God's grace and mercy, and we need to persevere in prayer. We need to pray for God to stop the injustice of abortion, for God's people to have compassion, courage, and wisdom to speak up. And we also need to lament the 43 million lives that are lost every year around the globe. But then after praying, we must take action. And again, I'm quoting John White again. He says that abortion has become a highly polarized and toxic issue in our society. But I believe that when we try to enter this battleground, our Christian task is first to listen and to understand, to empathize. Only in this way are we going to be able to speak with integrity, with authenticity, and with compassion. And the context in which Christians are called to speak is a very difficult one. Which is why I think often our position is to keep quiet and to step back. And this happens both in conversations with Christians and in conversations with non-Christians. And I think there are a few reasons for that. The first one is that the subject is very sensitive and we do not know how to start those conversations. And maybe the second reason is that we do not always take the time to look into the arguments and to develop firm convictions on this topic. But we need to show that being pro-life means caring about the unborn babies and their mothers, both before birth and after birth. And again, Daniel Darling explains that to be pro-life is a way of life. It is an approach that moves us to lend our voices, our prayers, our influence, and our resources to come alongside those whose flourishing is being threatened and whose dignity is being assaulted. And I think that in order for us to cultivate the right attitude in caring for women, it is important to understand the reasons behind their choice to have an abortion. So data from the Guttmacher Institute says that there are three most common reasons. The first one is that women are concerned for or feel responsible to other individuals. The second reason is that they do not afford to raise a child. And then the third reason is the fear that having a baby would make them unable to continue with work, school, or with pursuing the dreams that they have. And these are huge challenges, actually, that women face every day. And they are also issues that the church must step in and address. And I think it would be wonderful for all of us to work toward a time when society sees Christians as a group who will encourage women and who will provide emotional, financial, and spiritual support, both for them and for their unborn child. I think it would be beautiful to build a culture where people are less likely to choose abortion because the church has shown women that Christians and Christianity will give a better life for them and for their child. And this may seem overwhelming. I know it does, but I also know that God can help us in that. And I think we need to support mothers and to provide for children regardless of what the abortion policies say and regardless of whether they change or not. We need to show love in action and demonstrate the practical reality of the gospel. And again, I'm quoting Nancy Pearcey, who says that it is crucial that the church once again becomes known as a place that values women. Rejecting abortion is a way of expressing respect, not only for the child, but also for the mother. The church should also strive to be known as a sanctuary for those wounded by the callous cynicism of the abortion culture. We need to create a culture in our churches where those who made the very sad decision to have abortion can find forgiveness, grace, and hope. A culture where they can feel safe, where they do not have to fear that they will be judged or mistreated because of the choices that they have made. A culture where they can feel loved, and a culture that provides the biblical truth that there is grace for those who made the decision to terminate a pregnancy. I won't go into a lot of details here because we don't have a lot of time, but CARE runs a ministry called Open. You see the website, CARE's website over there and Open's website over there as well. Please do feel free to check those out. And Open aims at creating an environment within churches where unintended pregnancy and post-abortion concerns can be shared with grace and compassionate understanding. So if you would like to have access to more resources on this topic, you can check those two websites, and you can also get in contact with us, and we will be happy to share more. So maybe you are thinking, okay, this is all good information, but now what? How can we get involved in a very practical way? Well, I think that a first step could be having conversations. I think it's so important for Christians to have conversations with those around them and make them aware of the reality of abortion and uphold human dignity and the value of the unborn baby whenever they have the opportunity. And I think this might lead to us becoming unpopular. It's not easy, but we need to be brave enough to stand on the side of an unpopular cause. And moreover, when we have those conversations, we actually have a beautiful message to share. We have a better story to share because we have a message of forgiveness and grace, not a message of judgment. It's a message of forgiveness and grace for those who have struggled in this area. So you might know someone who has had an abortion or who has been involved in an abortion one way or the other. These people might carry a very deep pain and they might struggle a lot with guilt. So I think it's so important for all of us to be there for them and to encourage them in their journey, and to share the message that Christ can set them free from their guilt and from their shame, because there is forgiveness for this. Another way of taking action is by getting involved in the public debate around abortion. So you might want to write to your MP or to your other elected representative and share your concerns about abortion and actually encourage them to promote policies that support women and families and parents who are struggling in this area. There's a big conversation. There are so many suggestions that you could make around protecting or supporting single mothers, families who are struggling financially, and so on and so forth. We can have another conversation about that, but that's something that you could be involved in if you wanted to. You can also get involved in public advocacy yourself, if this is what God calls you to do. Maybe you feel called to open your homes for foster care or adoption. Maybe you can start an adoption and foster care support group for families in your church. Or maybe God calls you to start a pro-life ministry in your church and counsel women and support women who have experienced an abortion. Another option would be to financially support a crisis pregnancy center. There are many in Europe, so I think if you Google crisis pregnancy center in your area, you will find one that is probably very close to home. So you could get involved and support them, either financially or you could become a volunteer. You could, buy supplies for babies. There's so much that you can do. They will let you know. Or maybe you are in church ministry and you would like to organize some training sessions and equip and encourage your church members to support women and couples who are struggling with unplanned pregnancies. Maybe you can lead a Bible study or a Sunday school class and focus on the Imago Dei and seek to develop a holistically pro-life ethic among your church body. You can also provide community and care for single mothers in your church. I think that as Christ followers and as church families, God calls us to care. And he calls us to share the good news of Psalm 34, where it says that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And we need to be close to the brokenhearted as well. And women and men who have experienced abortion, one way or the other, are brokenhearted, and we need to be there for them. So I do not know what the Lord is calling you to do, but I do know that if we call ourselves for life, we cannot be indifferent to the topic of abortion, and we must take action in whatever way God has equipped us to do. And maybe one day we will look back and just like with slavery, we will wonder how our society could ever allow abortion in the first place. Maybe one day, by God's grace, we can see a culture that clearly affirms that a person is a person no matter how small. So let's pray and work for that day to come. Thank you. We will shortly go into small groups and discuss a few questions, but if you'd like to find out more information about this topic, please check out the resources that I've mentioned, that I've put in the outline that you have on your app. And there are a few really good, helpful books and articles there. And I would like to highlight a few. You've heard me quoting John Wyatt a lot. That's because he wrote Matters of Life and Death. excellent book. Then you've heard me quoting Nancy Pearcey a lot. That's because she wrote Love Thy Body, very good book. And then Randy Alcorn wrote Why Pro-Life. Then Daniel Darling wrote The Dignity Revolution. And also you can find a lot of good resources on CARE's website, www.care.org.uk.